Welcome to this channel, where we celebrate stories and storytellers. Today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to the storytelling event and experience. A production, an audio podcast, featuring yours truly, as well as some special guests, telling tales and spinning yarns in the gorgeous atmospheric surroundings of a 14th century Scottish abbey. That's right. We go live every month or two to a different location, record a show, and release it as a podcast episode shortly afterwards. This allows us to bring professional actors to places they might not otherwise visit, and brings our patrons a chance to join us on our travels to meet other fans and friends of the show. And yes, there are occasional shenanigans involving bagpipes. Oh my, yes. If you'd like to know more about the event or subscribe to receive updates about our next public show, you can visit our website or find us on social media. Now, let's get back to the show. Close your eyes. Now, love. Let your breath soften. Slow, ... like leaves drifting down a river. You're safe here. Tonight, you're going to travel far but without moving an inch. The hearth is glowing gently. The coals crackle and hum. A soft woolen blanket wraps around your shoulders. Outside, nightfall has draped the world in velvet. And somewhere far away, a single note from a lute floats on the breeze like a lullaby. Let me tell you a story, one told only when the stars are listening, and the moon is full enough to silver the tips of the grass. Our story begins on a bridge, one worn, smooth by the souls of 100 years. ... Scene 1. The silent village. In a quiet village, nestled in the cradle of a forgotten valley, time walked slowly. Cobblestone paths wound between timbered cottages. Lanterns flickered behind warped glass panes. Chickens murmured in their sleep beneath thatched roofs. And just beyond the last fence post, a little brook whispered lullabies to the mossy stones lining its bank. The village slept beneath the crooked finger of an old abbey ruin, its bones silhouetted by moonlight, tangled with ivy and crowned by silence. Each Tuesday night after supper, the villagers would quietly extinguish their candles, not out of superstition, but reverence, because they knew would come tracing to the bridge and the bard, beyond the edge of town, where the road forgot its name, stood the hollow bridge. It wasn't grand just fine. Stone arches over the stream, cloaked in moss and fern, but it had held its ground for centuries, catching stories and starlight with equal grace. Each week, under a sky full of listening stars, a man would arrive. His boots left no sound on the earth. His cloak was woven from twilight and travelled wind, and slung across his back was a lute, ancient and dark as polished walnut. They called him the Bard of Hollow Bridge. No one knew where he came from. He never asked for coin. He never asked for food. He only ever sang, and oh, how he sang. Scene 3. Melody to the wind. The bard would settle on the bridge's edge, where the stone was warmed by the moon. He would sit in stillness for several long minutes, as if... Then, with fingers soft out by time, he would tune his lute, not to any modern key, but to the scale passed down from monk to monk in abbeys now dust. A scale whispered to carry healing, to mend dreams torn at the edge. The strings would sing in intervals once thought to realign the spirit, and then he would play softly, slowly, not for applause, not for praise, but for the wind, seen for the notes between notes. If you've ever heard silence, so deep it felt like snow falling, ... You understand his music. Each note was like a candle lit in a cathedral's corner. Each pause between notes, a doorway into stillness. The villagers didn't gather on the bridge. No, they stayed tucked in bed. Windows cracked open just enough for the music to drift in soft as smoke. Children fell asleep before the third verse. The lonely clutched letters they'd never sent. Old men remembered names they hadn't spoken aloud in decades. Fire. And all the while, the bard played on, cloak-catching wind. Hair streaked with silver. Eyes closed as if he, too, were dreaming. Scene 5. The old woman's threads. On the edge of the village, in a low stone cottage, lived an old woman known as Moira of the Moonthread. She only wove at night by the glow of a single candle and the shine of her cat's yellow eyes. Her loom creaked softly, like shipwood swaying on water. And as the bard's music drifted through her shutters, she would match his rhythm with her weaving silver thread, catching the notes like starlight caught in cloth. You see, Moira believed, as the ancients did, that the moon's phases influenced the mind, bend the fingers, and even the thread. It was said that fabric woven beneath a waxing moon held warmth against grief. By that cloth spun beneath the full moon could ease bad dream, and that silver thread, when guided by song, could sew a heart back together again. So while others listened with their ears, Moira listened with her hands to seeing SIX lunar beliefs and secret magic in the time before clocks and factory. People looked upward to understand life. The moon didn't just light. The night, it governed the pulse of the soil, the tides of the mind, and even the wax and wane of sorrow. Farmers sowed seeds beneath crescent moons. Poets wrote only under gibbous skies, and dreamers, like Moira, wove their hopes into threads when the stars aligned. So when the bard came each Tuesday, it wasn't just music, it was ritual. The villagers never named it as such, but in their own quiet ways they honored it. A cup of milk left by the sill, a dried flower on the bridge, or the simple act of sleeping with the window cracked open to hear the final fading note. Scene 7. The wind remembers. They say wind forgets most things. It scatters secrets like dust, carries laughter off cliffs, and hums tunes. No one remembers composing, but not the bard's songs. No matter how softly he sang, the wind remembered. It carried his melody across moors and lakes, into forests, and through abbey ruins. Even the ravens tilted their heads when he played. Pitts said, in fact, that somewhere far across the hills. A lonely traveler once followed a breeze and ended up at Hollowbridge, just in time to hear a song that felt like it was written just for her. Okay, before we get started, I just want to say thank you for 300,000 subs. That means so much to me. So, to celebrate, here's a bonus scene from my short film based on the fairy tale of the juniper tree, which will be premiering later this year. This is actually the very first scene I wrote for that project, and it's set in the world of folk tales. The old woman sorted through jars filled with eyes that blinked and ears that twitched, fingers that twitched and noses that wrinkled. One by one, she hummed a name for each. But the last jar held something unfamiliar. A small house made of bark and smelling of pine needles. Inside slept a girl with hair like woven sunshine. The old woman frowned. She had no name for this. She stepped closer. The girl stirred, stretching. And that's when the old woman saw the wings tucked under her shawl. "Ah," she whispered, knowing at last. "You are the girl who fell out of the sky." And now, a story about music. Beveled, just beyond the willow wood, an old herbalist named She wore skirts dyed with crushed berries, and her fingernails were always stained green from picking mint and yarrow in the moonlight. Her cottage smelled of earth and lavender, and her windows were never fully closed, so that the breeze might carry secrets in. Ellsworth loved the music. The bard played beneath Hollow Bridge. She loved the way the chords echoed in her chest, the way the melodies mingled with the murmur of the stream. She would listen until her eyelids drooped and the world spun tailies in her head. And every Tuesday night, Ellsworth brewed a special tea. It was steeped with valerian, chamomile, a pinch of lemon balm, and a few leaves from a plant she only picked when the bard played, one that only bloomed on music's edge. She called it moonstep. Its petals opened only to rhythm, to silence made sacred by sound. The villagers swore that one sip of moonstep tea could untie the tittiest dream. Beneath Hollow Bridge, beneath the moss and water, the roots of an ancient willow tree wove deep into the soil. These roots had listened longer than any villager. They had heard footfalls from pilgrims, whispers from lovers, and the soft thrum of the bard's chords. One spring, after a fierce storm rolled through the valley, a young boy wandered to the bridge. He wasn't crying, but his eyes held something heavy, something he couldn't speak. He sat on the stone ledge, his legs swinging, and listened to the stream. And then he sang. Not a full melody, just a line, a single phrase that hummed like hope. The next morning, a sprout bloomed beneath the willow, silver-veined leaves curling skyward. The villagers said the bridge had caught his sorrow and turned it into something that grew. Moira had no daughters, but her apprentice, a young woman named Brynna, inherited her loom. Brynna was quiet, always watching, always listening. She spoke little, but when she wove, her hands moved like wind through grain. After Moira's passing, Brynna began a new tradition. Every full moon, she laid a cloth across the bridge and stitched a single constellation into it using. Over time, The bridge was covered in stars, fabric maps trailing over the stones like a sky falling to earth. Children would tiptoe across them, as if stepping through galaxies. And when the bard saw them, he smiled, not with his mouth, but with something older, in the way his fingers lingered on certain chords, and in how the wind stilled, just long enough to listen closer. Once, a boy named Corwin came to the village from far away. He had not spoken since his mother fell ill, and his eyes were wide with words that had no sound. The villagers welcomed him with bread and kind glances, but still he remained silent. One Tuesday he followed the older children toward Hollow Bridge and stood at the edge of the crowd. When the bard began to play, Corwin's eyes lit up. Tack! He stepped closer and closer, and then, without meaning to, he began to hum, just faintly, just a whisper, blah. And by the time the song ended, the hush around him had grown into warmth. That night, for the first time, he spoke in a dream, and the next morning he asked for breakfast, using a voice as soft as down, but his own. One winter, the river froze over, and the blizzard raged for weeks. Snow piled high, and spirits sank. The woodpile dwindled. Fire sputtered. Hope nearly died. Bah! Brynner worked feverishly at her loom, stitching a design that pulsed with warmth. She used moon thread, moonlight captured in needle and dye, and wove the constellations that mirrored the bard's brightest tunes. She worked until her hands bled and her eyes were dark with fatigue. Then she laid the finished piece across the village square. At first, it was just a blanket, nothing remarkable. Until the bard stepped forward, placed his hand in the center, closed his eyes, and began to play. As his music swelled, the fabric shimmered, the colors shifting and swirling like flames. Then the blanket burst into light. From its depths emerged a stag, antlers crowned with stars, fur patterned with moons. With a final flourish from the bard, the stag dipped its head and vanished. The villagers gasped. For, in its place, lay a hearth, crackling with life and radiating such heat that snow melted from its edges. All winter, this stag returned each Tuesday, feeding those who gathered round until spring. Each Tuesday, the crowds grew larger at the bridge, eager to hear the bard's newest songs. But one day, the villagers noticed something strange. When he strummed certain chords, the lute vibrated with more force than usual. At first, they thought it was just their ears, but week after week, the humming intensified, drawing their attention to the instrument, to its worn surface. The villagers knew it was ancient, but now they wanted to know more. So, one particularly crowded evening, while the bard took a bow after a lively jig, a curious young man snuck into his wagon. He peeked under blankets and around barrels until he found the lute resting on a pile of cushions. It was plain, crafted from dark wood and strung with gut, yet it radiated such power that the young man hesitated to touch it. Carefully, he traced the rim, searching for markings, anything to explain the magic within. But there was nothing except a faint imprint in the shape of a crescent moon. Puzzled, the young man carefully lifted the lute lute and cradled it close. At that instant, a chord resonated through him, causing the hairs on his arms to stand on end. He raced out of the wagon before anyone noticed, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Reaching the edge of the crowd, he stopped. Taking a deep breath, he cradled the lute tighter and began to play. Years passed. The seasons turned, and the crowds at the bridge remained constant. But one day, the bard didn't show up. The villagers waited patiently, chatting amongst themselves, but he never came. Then another Tuesday passed, and still no music filled the air. The people began to worry. Pooh. What if he had met with an accident? Was he ill, or had he simply forgotten? Curiosity overcame concern, and a handful of villagers crossed the bridge to check on him. They knocked on his door, but no answer came. So they pushed it open and stepped inside. To their surprise, the room was empty. His lute rested on a stool, untouched, but a sheet of music lay open on his table. One of the villagers picked it up, recognizing the melody. It was their favorite song, the one that had become their anthem. Looking closer, they noticed the page was blank, except for a series of dots, each marking where a note should be played. But no one could read music, except maybe Brina. She was now the oldest of the villagers, and her hands, gnarled with age, still moved with surprising grace across her loom. When the others told her about the bard's missing music, she didn't hesitate. Phew. She gathered her things and headed for the bridge. Upon reaching the house, she stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. She found the open music and carefully smoothed it out. Studying the dots, she finally smiled. It wasn't music that was missing. It was woven in the very fabric of the bridge itself. She hurried out, racing toward the town square, where a crowd had gathered. The music was supposed to begin soon, but the melody hung in the balance. Brina reached the center of the square, looked up at the bridge, and pressed her palms against the cold stones. As the villagers watched in suspense, she closed her eyes and began to sing. The moment her voice hit the first note, Praz, the melody soared, sweeping across the bridge and filling the valley with music. Tears streamed down Brina's face as she poured her heart into the song. At the last chord, the crowd erupted in cheers, relief washing over them, but Brina paid them no heed. She stood frozen, eyes wide, for she had felt something shift within her, something that resonated with the music of the bridge. Slowly, she raised her gaze to the sky. "I see it," she whispered, awe filling her voice. "I can see the music." And from that day on, whenever the villagers gathered at the bridge, they heard not only the bard's songs, but also Brina's voice weaving harmony with the melody. And that's the end of this particular tale. Pith, if you liked this video, please remember to share and subscribe. Bye. The best stories, like fine threads, don't tell you how to live. They let you find your own path in the light of their wisdom. Once, long ago, in a land where mist clung to hills and tales, whispered on the breeze, lived a bard. His name meant Winchester, but to most he was simply known as Stiller. For his music spoke of life and loss, love and longing, woven together so gently. They echoed the rhythms of their soul. Wherever he went, people listened. When their hearts were heavy, he eased their sorrow with a song. When joy bubbled like a fountain, he danced with them beneath the sun. But it was his stillness, the moments after a melody hung in the air, that people treasured most. Those silences wove deeper than words. True, they stirred memories, unveiled truths, calmed troubled minds. It was as if the world itself held its breath, letting the music resonate within. One day, Winchester noticed something unusual. Above a distant hill, the wind seemed to be still. Curiosity sparked within him, like a new tune. How? He followed the sound of silence until he reached an old moss-covered bridge, known as the Hollow Bridge, for its arches hummed with whispers from beyond. Underneath, a stream chuckled, barely audible, yet its laughter echoed strangely. He sat on a nearby stone, closed his eyes, and leaned into the silence. A deep peace settled upon him, soothing his restless spirit. And then he heard it again, not the rushing water, nor the bird's song, nor the wind, but a gentle voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, beckoned to him, promising solace and understanding. He walked toward the sound, stepping onto the bridge. Its stone surface was cool beneath his feet, yet he felt a warmth spreading through him. As he reached the center, the arch overhead seemed to open, not physically, but in a way that resonated within his very being. He felt lighter, freer, as if burdens he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted. And in that moment, he understood. This wasn't just a place of physical passage. It was a threshold between the everyday world and a realm of deeper truths. The voice grew stronger, urging him forward. He continued walking, drawn deeper into the heart of the bridge. Suddenly, the water's murmur swelled, and the air shimmered as if disturbed by an unseen presence. Yet when he turned, there was nothing there, just the flowing water and the whispering wind. He reached out as if to touch something, but grasped only air. And then, right before his eyes, the water rippled. What seemed like ages passed, though only a heartbeat could have elapsed. And then it stilled. From its surface rose a woman unlike any he'd ever seen. Her hair flowed like the stream he'd crossed. Her eyes shone with starlight, and her skin seemed to glow with an inner light. Her gaze met his, and in that instant he knew who she was. The voice he'd heard, the peace he'd felt, the music that echoed within him, all were hers. Time ceased to exist. There was only the present moment, charged with untold potential. She offered him her hand, and he took it, feeling a jolt of energy course through him. Together they walked on the bridge. He felt her presence wrap around him, enveloping him in a warmth that penetrated his very core. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, but found himself strangely mute. All he could do was walk and feel. At the end of the bridge, they paused. Before him lay a clearing bathed in sunlight. In its center stood an ancient tree. Its branches reached toward the sky, forming a natural archway. The woman gestured toward it, and then, as if awakening from a dream, Windchaser blinked. The clearing vanished. The tree disappeared. And standing alone on the hollow bridge, he realized he was changed. The encounter had left an indelible mark upon him, as if a chord deep within his soul had been struck and resonated. The hollow bridge remained unchanged, yet for him it was forever transformed. With newfound purpose, he returned to his music, infusing it with the essence of the bridge and its mysterious guardian. People flocked to him, drawn to the depth and tranquility his music now exuded. Bare, his melodies wove stories of lives well lived, of love found and lost, and of the profound silence that connected all things. And though he never spoke of his experience at the bridge, its echoes resonated in every note he played. It became a pilgrimage site for many seeking solace or inspiration. And as the years passed, tales of the wind chaser and the stillness on the hollow bridge became a legend, whispered on the wind. And here we are, at the end of our journey through 45 scenes. It has been an incredible adventure filled with magic, music, and the enduring power of storytelling. But, as all stories must, it has now reached its conclusion. Have you enjoyed our time together? Do you want more tales like this? Tell us in the comments below. Your feedback is our wind, guiding us through the vast landscape of stories. A little girl named Nell sat quietly in the weaving room. She wasn't old enough to spin, not yet, but she loved to sit among the folded fabrics. The smell of linen and lavender filling her nose with quiet comfort. That night, the moon rose over the abbey ruins and cast long shadows across the floor, laying her head against a bolt of soft silver cloth. Nell closed her eye, and it sang, faint and gentle. The thread hummed barely more than a breath, but Nell heard it clearly. Not with her ears, but deep inside her chest. It was a lullaby. At first, she thought she imagined it. So she pressed closer to the cloth, breathed in the scent of chamomile and thyme, and listened. It sang again, this time a little louder. Nell didn't know how to play the lute, didn't know how to read music, and couldn't name the tune, but it sounded familiar, like a half-remembered dream. She didn't tell anyone, not yet, but every Tuesday she returned to that cloth and the song, and it always sang something new. Some nights it was joy, other nights longing. Always true. Years later, she would become the first weaver to sing with the thread as she worked. And when she did, the room smelled faintly of pine, smoke, and honey-like stories returning home. This is the first scene in my new story, and here's the description of the scene. You can find the link in the card above or down in the pinned comment. In this story, the Weavers' Guild lives in a peaceful mountain village at the edge of an ancient forest. For generations, they've honored a mysterious bard who lived in the mountains long ago. Whenever they spin, they say he guides their hands. Every Tuesday, they gather in a clearing beneath an arching bridge to play his favorite song. But only the youngest weaver knows the truth. One day, someone new arrives in the village. A girl with stars in her hair and stories in her eyes. as the villagers share their tales of the Hollow Bridge. The newcomers listens intently. After all, she heard whispers of a legend like this growing up. She just never expected it to be real. So far, I have 54 scenes planned. Preach. Framed by a single line of prose and set in a world where magic lives in the details. From a cloak woven from moonlight to a song that stops time. I hope to show that magic doesn't need spells or incantations. It just needs hearts willing to listen. But I won't do it alone. Here are all the names of the supporters who signed up for early access to the story. If you'd like to join them and get the next scene early, please click the link below. And don't worry, even if you sign up after the story is released, you'll get access right away. Yeah. You can also check out the link in the pinned comments. Okay, let's do this. First, we'll start with the details. As usual, the first sentence sets the scene. One evening, long after Brynner passed her loom to a new weaver, a little girl named Nell sat quietly in the weaving room. We can picture her sitting quietly among the folded fabrics. But where is this place? Here are 4 clues. She wasn't old enough to spin, not yet, but she loved to sit among the folded fabrics. That tells us she's probably in a place where people weave. The smell of linen and lavender filling her nose with quiet comfort confirms that. Now notice that it's evening and the moon has risen, so this is probably somewhere without much lamplight. Next, we learn about Nell. She's young, too young to weave. And finally, we hear her first clue. And it sang. Faint and gentle, the thread hummed. Does it mean the building itself is singing? Maybe the room might offer a hint. So we look to the second sentence. And it always sang something new. Some nights it was joy, other nights longing. Okay, so it sings every night, but it's not the building. What else could it be? Well, Nell falls asleep, leaning against a bolt of soft silver cloth. And the next morning, the oldest weaver shows a newcomer a special tapestry. She showed him the cloth where the babe had slept, smiling at the memory of tiny hands tracing patterns in the folds. So it's the cloth that sings. And what does it sing? Lullabies to the babe. Next, let's look at the emotions. The main character feels content at first. She's relaxed enough to fall asleep, but later we see the word longing. How does that fit? I'd say Nell experiences a longing for connection. Perhaps for her mother, or maybe for a sense of belonging to the guild. Now let's think about the setting. We know this takes place in a mountainous village. We can assume there's some kind of mystery or magic here too. And we already have a few hints of that. We know that the bard watches over these weavers, and that they can make a cloak from moonlight. Now let's add in a few details to bring this scene to life. We know that Nell is young, so maybe the other weavers will treat her like a child. We also know it's nighttime, so we could describe the sounds or smells of the village sleeping nearby. And since we're focusing on touch in this scene, we could mention how soft everything is. Finally, we need a climax. What happens to push the story forward? Well, the scene begins with Nell listening to the cloth, and ends with her decision to keep it a secret for now. That's a nice arc. Finally, let's try to match the tone of the writing to the story I want to tell. For example, I'm going for something lyrical and fantastical. So I might use more figurative language. We can also adjust the pacing by varying our sentences. Short sentences can build excitement. Longer ones can slow things down. Let's try this. One evening, long after Brenna passed her loom to a new weaver, a little girl named Nell sat quietly in the weaving room. The smell of linen and lavender filled her nose with quiet comfort. She wasn't old enough to spin, not yet, but she loved to sit among the folded fabrics. That night, the moon rose over the abbey ruins and cast long shadows across the floor. Laying her head against a bolt of soft silver cloth, Nell closed her eyes, and it sang, faint and gentle. The thread hummed barely more than a breath. But Nell heard it clearly, not with her ears, but deep inside her chest. It was a lullaby. At first, she thought she imagined it. So she pressed closer to the cloth, breathed in the scent of chamomile and thyme, and listened. It sang again, this time a little louder. Okay, I think that's a good start. So what do you think? Any suggestions? Please leave them in a comment below. I'll take them into account and update this scene before posting the final version online. And if you sign up for early access, you'll be the first to read it. So, what are you waiting for? Click the link below and join us today. Thanks for watching. The air was thick with honeysuckle and sadness. Every Tuesday, without fail, the traveling bard would arrive at dusk, making his way to the hollow bridge, a stone arch spanning a stream that gurgled even in the gloomiest months. And always, just before his song began, a woman named Moira would press her ear against her window, listening hard. Her cottage was the closest to the bridge. So, each Tuesday evening, she'd sew by lamplight, pausing only when the lute strings hummed. Her needle flashed as fast as the bard's fingers. Her latest piece, a deep blue cloak, almost done. It was a somber shade, like ink in a forgotten letter. But woven into its fabric were patterns that flickered and changed. Like old constellations, they only appeared when you weren't looking directly at them. Some said the cloak was stitched with the hair of comet. Others whispered it was dyed in tears collected from the dreams of children. But Moira believed something gentler. She said that cloak is made of memory. Every song he sings, every sorrow he eases, settles into the threads. It moved with the wind. Yes, but also with emotion. And if you stood close enough, though few ever did, you might hear it whisper names. Names long gone. Names still waiting. She sighed and picked up a strand, threading it through the eye of her needle. This cloak was for a young mother whose child had fled to the city, leaving her behind with nothing but memory. Maybe something woven from starlight and lullabies would keep her a little warmer, as the final chord of the song echoed into the hills. The bell at the top of the crumbling abbey overlooking the valley chimed once, only once a week, only when the bard played. No one ever saw it swing. No wind was strong enough to move it. But as the music faded, the bell would chime softly, as if time itself had bowed its head. Some believed it was coincidence, others enchantment. But Moira believed the bell had a soul, and that it rang for sorrow, heal. When the bard finally stopped playing, the moon climbed higher. It spilled silvery light onto the bridge. Now was her favorite part, when the air grew quiet, and the only sound was the stream burbling over smooth stones. Then the most beautiful part, when the melody stayed with her, stirring inside until she could feel it in her fingers, achingly real. She let the rhythm guide her hands, humming along until her lips moved without her knowledge. And she was making music, too. Every song he sang gave her a new story to tell. Tapestries, shawls, ribbons. She made gifts for those who needed them most. People whose troubles sat heavy on their shoulders, clouding their eyes. After each song, Moira would press her finished cloth to her cheek. The thread would be warm, warm with the hush between notes. Each tapestry, shawl, or ribbon she wove seemed to hold the essence of that night's melody. And, when given as a gift, those who wore it claimed their dreams changed. Not just sweeter, but truer, as if the fabric itself remembered a story they'd forgotten they needed. Children slept deeper with her moon-thread quilts. Mothers wept less into her shawls. And one winter, a young man returned from war with his arm bound in a scrap of her silver weave, and no nightmares touched him again. But not everyone who came to the bridge stayed for the music. Sometimes, just before the first chords rang out, someone new would arrive, lost and lonely, needing comfort or seeking solace. The bard never asked questions. He simply played, and those who came seeking found what they needed in the melody, even if they couldn't understand the words. One particular Tuesday, a traveler arrived just after dusk. She wore a faded green cloak and carried no lantern. Her boots were muddy from the forest path, and her eyes shimmered with tears she wasn't yet ready to shed. The villagers watched from their windows as she crossed the hollow bridge and knelt beside the bard. She didn't speak, neither did he. Instead, she removed a ribbon from her hair, woven silver thread, and placed it beside him. Moira gasped from her window. It was her ribbon, one she'd gifted long ago to a grieving mother. A ribbon that had traveled far. A ribbon that remembered. The bard nodded once and began to play. Not a tune they had heard before, but one that felt known. The traveler closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she slept right there on the mossy stones of the bridge. When the song ended, the travelers were gone. The villagers wondered where she'd come from, where she'd go, and why she'd needed the bard's song. Moira had an idea. She'd wove similar magic into her own garments, but hers weren't so grand. Still, she felt a pull, as if the music had rearranged something inside her. The next morning, she wove faster than ever. Her fingers flew across the loom, chasing the rhythm of the bard's strange new song. The thread sparkled beneath her fingertips, catching moonlight like dew. She didn't even notice when the candle blew out. She wove in the dark, guided only by sound and instinct, and the glow of memory. Growth she made was unlike any before, wide as the table, light as mist, and threaded with patterns she didn't recognize. When dawn arrived, she spread it across her bed and saw something astonishing. Stars, not just stitched shapes, but real ones, twinkling softly in the weave, moving slowly, as if the sky itself had nestled into her thread. Spring turned to summer, and still the bard came. Each week, the same hush, the same reverence. But Moira grew slower. Her hands trembled. Her threads tangled more easily. One morning, she wrapped herself in her star-woven cloth and stepped barefoot to her garden. She smiled at the sky and whispered, "Thank you for the music." She passed that night peacefully. Her cat curled at her feet, her loon silent. The villagers mourned quietly. But when Tuesday came, they listened even harder and wept, because the bard played a song of farewell. No words, just wind and thread, and sorrow turned sweet. Years passed. The meadow grew wilder. The roof tiles slipped further from the abbey walls, but the music kept coming. Once, twice, thrice, then forever. Now, when children ask about the bard, the villagers smile. They say, "You'll hear him when your heart is ready, and when travelers pass through, weary from roads both real and imagined. They're gifted scraps of silver thread, just in case. The bridge still stands. The music still comes. And if you lie very still on a Tuesday night, with your window cracked just enough, you might hear it too, the hush between notes, the shimmer of thread, the whisper of the wind carrying sorrow home." This is the end of our special audio series, 78 scenes from the life of a bard. Music has been kind of my thing for a long time. And this last year, I got to spend a lot of time making music with some really good friends. My pal Greg Berbatis did the composition and mixing. Bretch, which means he assembled all these beautiful musical ideas and made sure they worked together well. Our pal, the multi-talent Adam Argyle, did the mastering, which is sort of like quality control for vinyl. And I did the vocals, the creative writing, and also the illustrations. Here's a little sketchbook page I drew while we were making this. We started working on the music back in September of 2021. So we've had it for a little bit. Because it's adventuring music designed for tabletop role-playing game, we decided to wait to release it until the end of our actual play series. We didn't want to spoil things. Also, making albums takes a lot longer than it seems. So it has been a very exciting moment for me to finally get to share it with all of you. It's a little nerve-wracking, to be honest, but mostly exciting. This music means a lot to me. I'm biased, of course, because I love this world and its characters, and because I got to help make it. But I think it's really good on its own. Like, I hope you enjoy listening to it, even if you have unheard any of the tales of the ravaged moon before. You can find it pretty much anywhere you download or stream music. There's a link on the front page of our website, which also has some nice bonus material if you'd like to check it out. And if you have Apple Music, you can actually listen to the album right now because they dropped it early. If you're re-watching this video on our channel and you do like to purchase a physical copy of the vinyl, it'll be available soon. Right now we're waiting on some packaging parts, but you can also pre-order it on our site. ULL pay what it costs us to make it, and we LL send you a copy as soon as we have them. All that aside, I'm really proud of this music and I hope you love it. So let us go ahead and finish up our evening here in Fairhaven and bring this series to an end. Our adventurers are standing on the remains of the old Abbey wall, gazing down at the lights twinkling in the valley below. The wind is carrying the tune of the bard's final song. Maybe there will be other songs, other adventures. Maybe this isn't goodbye. Higher. And so, my dears, we come to the end of this particular tale. So, here's a question for you. What do you think this story's about? In other words, what does it mean to you? If you'd like to share your thoughts, please do in the comments below. I'm always curious to read what you have to say. But in the meantime, here are some ideas to consider if you're still looking for more threads to pull. Sometimes a lullaby isn't just a lullaby. Sometimes a dream isn't just a dream. Sometimes a story is the thing itself, all wrapped up in metaphor and moonlight. This story weaves together several of the most requested elements from our previous tape, including a bridge, a lute, and even a few nods to the infamous gold thread. Here, as a hint, consider how these motifs appear in other tales, and how they deepen the meaning here. The characters in this story don't play as large a role as the objects and themes. Why do you think that is? How does it affect the mood of the story? Is it important that we don't know much about any of them? Who are they, if not a collection of traits? And what effect does that have on how we connect to them? What makes something a lullaby? What makes it different from other songs? And what might that reveal about the nature of this story itself? One way to approach this story is through its atmosphere. Notice the author's word choices. Consider how the mood changes throughout the tale and how that reflects the inner lives of the character. Remember, an emotional response is a valid interpretation. So, pay attention to what this story makes you feel. This story isn't fast-paced. There isn't a clear conflict or resolution. Instead, it focuses on small, seemingly insignificant moments. How does this affect you as a reader? What purpose might these moments serve? How do they build on one another? What is their cumulative effect? If you see this story as an allegory, what might that mean? What kind of larger truths might be hidden within its layers? How do setting and atmosphere work together to make this story feel magical? Consider the descriptions of the bridge, the stars, the song, the characters' interactions with these things. What effect do they have? Of course, these are just a few ideas to get you started. You're welcome to explore any and all aspects that resonate with you. This story has been crafted with care, and there are many ways to appreciate its beauty. Now, if you've enjoyed this reading, I encourage you to seek out the original source. The complete short story is titled And So, and was written by the wonderfully talented author. You can find more of their work online. As always, I'll leave links to everything I mentioned in the description below. And while you're down there, please do you aren't forget to show your support. If you liked this story and if you'd like to hear more from me. Also, and this is really important, please remember to take care of yourselves. Drink water, stretch, turn off your phone, and allow yourself to simply exist. Stories like this one remind us that sometimes the quietest places hold the strongest magic, and the gentlest lullabies can carry us home. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and above all, stay safe. When your eyes grow heavy, when your thoughts begin to slow, when you feel something ancient and gentle wrap around your heart like soft thread, remember, the bard still plays, the bridge still stands, and the song, woven through stone and story and sleep, still waits for you. You need only listen to the hush, to the wind, to the place between dreams, where notes begin again and again and again. What is this? What is this? Within our memories, some moments hang suspended. You know those ones. They have no clear beginning or end, but simply are like an unfinished sentence. The ink of an unpainted picture. The low hum of a half-remembered tune. Here is one of mine. Scene 1. Echoes left on skin. There was a feather breasted in the village library, cradled inside the woven book, a collection of the bard's songs and tales compiled after his passing. This one wasn't pressed flat or glued in place. Pie sat gently, always, between different pages, never quite where anyone had left it. It was a single black feather with silver tips. Some claimed the feather moved on its own, that it knew which page you needed most. Others said it had belonged to the raven that once landed on Hollow Bridge. Bars those who traced its edge while reading swore their heart calmed, that their worries loosened, that forgotten names and quiet memories came back, not loudly, but like firelight warming the corners of a darkened room. Children began calling it the bard's quill. No one corrected them. Scene 2. The notes in the trees. South of the village stood a cluster of birch trees, white and slender, always swaying softly, as if listening. Brynner used to say, they remembered music better than people did. And after her passing, the villagers began to notice, on quiet days, especially on Tuesdays, the trees made music. Not with leaves or wind, but with space. Bird song drifted in perfect rhythm. Branches creaked in time. Even the silence between gusts felt measured. It was as though the bard's songs had soaked into the bark, woven into the rings like lullabies, carved by time itself. Elders came there to sit. Children came to nap beneath the rustle. And sometimes, just sometimes, brood, the trees would sigh in harmony. Scene 3. The Threadling Festival. In time, the village began celebrating Threadling Day each spring, named for the first silken sprout seen near Hollowbridge, one said to have grown from a childish sorrow turned to song. Everyone wore something woven, ribbons, cloaks, even wristbands of moon-dyed yarn. The bridge was decorated with streamers stitched with wishes, and the abbey bell was gently rung, a twilight knock, loud but soft, like a nod to the past. Children told stories aloud while holding thread between their fingers, as if spinning new myths from air. And when night fell, a single lute hand made by the village carpenter was played beneath the stars. The melody was different every year, but it always ended the same way, with silence, the kind that speak. Scene for the unfinished song in the woven book's back pages. Beneath a flap of faded velvet lay a scrap of parchment, written in the bard's own hand. One verse, no title, bit read, when breath becomes wind and strings fall still. Let silence carry the tune I never finished. Below the verse was a faint sketch, the hollow bridge under a crescent moon. Brina had found it years before, but never spoke of it. She believed some songs were not meant to be completed, only remembered in silence, piece by piece. Lyra, when shown the parchment, wept. That night she composed a melody with no chorus, no ending. She played it only once, then never again. They called it the Bard's Pause. Scene 5, the dreams weavers dare not speak. There were stories Brina told only once, in whispers, just before sleep overtook her, that the Bard had not always been a man, that he had once been part of the wind itself, born of sorrow, raised in stillness, formed by lullabies, never sung aloud. She said the loom didn't weave thread, but memory, and the songs. They weren't written, they were released from the hollows of the heart. Only the most silent listeners ever truly heard the truth. And when they did, they never repeated it, because some music belongs only to dreams. Scene 6, the chords beneath the floorboards. When renovating the weaving room, a villager found dozens of cords beneath the floorboards, tied and looped, knotted with perfect care. Some were thick with many strands, others thin and delicate. Colors varied: storm cloud, gray, spring green, midnight blue. Brina had left them there. No notes, no instruction, just silent, woven shapes of emotion. When the villagers held them in their hands, they didn't need explanation. One made a widow weep. Another made a child smile in their sleep. And one was never touched, again placed carefully in the hollow bridge's hollow where it stayed, gently pulsing with warmth. Scene 7, the river's memory. It said the stream beneath Hollow Bridge remembers everything. Every song sung across its stones. Every child's footfall, every tear dropped, every word unspoken but felt. Some nights, if you kneel beside the bank and lean very close to moss, breath slowed you, may hear whispered, not voices exactly, but melodies that echo not through ears, but through skin. Brina believed the river and the bard were once the same, both steady, both soft, both carved by time but never hardened. So, each year on the bard's birthday, no one knew the day, but everyone felt when it came. The villagers dropped silver ribbons into the current. The stream carried them gently, and never once did one get caught. Scene 8. The eye that saw sound. A painter came to the village. 1. Carrying only a satchel of brushes and one clean canvas. She stayed a week and said almost nothing. On the final Tuesday, she sat alone on Hollow Bridge and listened. And then she painted, not faces, not the bridge, not the bar. Height, she painted sound. Waves of blue stitched with gold. Circles overlapping like ripples, and soft lines that rose and fell like breath. She called the painting thread of wind. It was hung in the library, opposite the woven book, and those who stood before it for too long often walked away, not from sadness, but from recognition. Scene 9. The last string, Lyra's lute, broke one winter night. Not suddenly just a slow snap of the final string as she tuned it beside the fire. She stared at it for a long while, then smiled, and without speaking, she removed the broken string and tucked it into her cloak's inner seam. Later that night, she walked the bridge barefoot, cloak trailing like twilight, and hummed softly to the river. She said no good song ends with sound. It ends with stillness, and begins again with breath. And now, the last scene. Scene 10. Stillness. After Brynna passed, Lyra was found asleep beneath the birch trees. Her head rested on the harp, a single chord, loose, as if waiting. Beside her lay a length of moonlight-colored yarn. It had been wound around the trees, creating a hushed melody only leaves and Lyra knew, pardoned as the sun rose, painting the sky with colors the bard had never seen. She woke, humming the river's reply. So we're nearing the end here, folks, so bear with me while I try to wrap things up. In the last scene, Salen heard the song that had no beginning. And today, in the next scene, she is an adult and is getting ready to pass that song on to someone else. But first, let's see where she's been. In the meantime, and since we've been following the Cloak Hall story, let's follow the cloak some more. Well, that's convenient, I suppose. We can skip ahead to scene 8, where, inside the house of the weaver, who received the cloak from Salen, and she's showing it to her granddaughter. The granddaughter is amazed. She picks it up and hugs it tightly. She turns to her grandmother and asks, "Is it really magic?" The grandmother nods. She knows it's real magic, not fairy magic, which is a much more rare thing to find these days. Real magic is earned. Pulse. It's crafted out of moments. It comes from people. She tells her granddaughter about Salen and the other threadkeepers, about their cloaks and their songs, about how they hold the dreams and memories of the people they've loved and lost. She explains that each threadkeeper has a piece of the whole, and when they return it, that part of their story returns with them. And then she hands the cloak to her granddaughter, who, like Salen before her, doesn't know what to say. Now, this seems like a good moment to remind you all that we are streaming live right now. Come chat with us in the comments. Outside, the wind is rising. Rain lashes against the window. Lightning cracks, and the little girl says, I think we should go sing to the bridge now. She runs out the door, the cloak pulled tight. Her grandmother watches her leave, smiles, and heads to her spinning wheel. We move to the bridge. The little girl sings under the downpour. The music swells. We zoom out and reveal that she isn't alone. Poof. This is the moment we've been building toward. All the thread keepers are here. They stand side by side on the bridge, singing to the wind. Their voices combine, and the sound carries on the rain. Suddenly, Elara appears, her face streaked with rain, her eyes shining. She looks at us and smiles. Then she looks away, back at the bridge, and whispers, "They're returning." Till we pan to the a figure steps out, silhouetted against the flash of lightning. They are followed by another and another, until the entire forest seems to be pouring out onto the bridge. There are thread keepers here from every generation. Some are children. Some are old enough to remember the first frost when the cloak was lost. They're all here now, filling the clearing. The music rises. The crowd swells. Suddenly, from the center of the crowd, a hand shoots out and grabs Fenris's cloak. He turns, surprised, and sees Eloan standing before him. Her eyes are wide and shining. She's holding out the cloak to him, waiting. Fen takes the cloak and puts it on. The moment he does, the music swells again, and all the thread keepers join hands and spin in a great circle around him, bare. Their laughter echoes in the storm, mingling with their song. The scene widens to reveal a tapestry stretching across the sky itself. The characters are merely a small part of it. We pull back further still, and we see that the entire world is listening. Mountains and valleys, rivers and plains, deserts and forests. Everyone and everything, even the sky and the wind, are listening to the song of the And I suppose it is time for me to thank you all for listening to the song of this series. So welcome to the final scene of our story. This has been a tale of a kingdom of silence, where sound had magical properties, and where one family of thread keepers kept its power in balance with the world. In this final sequence of scenes, we're going to see their legacy live. We're going to see how their magic touched the people around them. And we're going to hear how the song continued to live on through each generation. Han Scene 89. The Thread Within the Veil. Illawen once wove a veil made of mist. She never explained how, only that she began it on a morning when the fog wouldn't tea-lift, and finished it just before the moon rose. When worn, the veil blurred the world, not in sight but in sound. All harshness softened. Footsteps were muffled. Whispers became lullaby. Even grief, when spoken aloud beneath the veil, lost its sting. Villagers began to borrow it, not for weddings, not for pageantry, but for healing. They would sit quietly with it over their shoulders and breathe. When they returned it, they always left something behind: pressed flowers, feathers, bits of thread. Alawan never asked for payment. She only smiled and said, "It remembers you now." Scene 90. The river that stood still. 1 year. After the longest summer drought, the stream beneath the hollow bridge slowed, not dried but still. So still, it reflected the sky perfectly. Villagers gathered in silence, watching as clouds drifted, not just above, but below the band. Then, as the bard's cloak was laid once more on the bridge stones, something remarkable happened. The river began to sing. No movement, no ripple, just tone soft, low, resonant. It was as if stillness itself had become music. Even the bell in the abbey held its voice that night. Be, 'cause the river had spoken. And there was nothing more to say. Scene 91. The Tapestry of Sleepwalkers. There came a season when several villagers began sleepwalking. Not dangerously, just quietly. They would rise in the middle of the night and walk slowly toward the bridge, eyes closed, steps gentle. Some stopped at the abbey. Some sat at the river's edge. Some simply stood beneath the stars. And then, after a few minutes, they would return to bed. None remembered doing it, but all, upon waking, spoke of the same dream. A soft cloak, a silver thread, plen music they couldn't hum, but still somehow knew. Brynner's great-granddaughter wove a tapestry of this pattern, based only on their stories. When hung in the village square, it glowed faintly at night, and every thread hummed, just slightly out of time. Scene night to the loom that dreamt in the weaving hall. Long after the last spindle spun for the night, Brynner's original loom remained untouched in the corner. Bought one evening, a gust of wind blew open the shutters, and the loom moved, not dramatically, just one gentle creak, one slow push of the shuttle. Salin entered with her lantern, heart calm, breath even. She sat. She did not touch it. By the loom wove, one row on its own, and in the morning a single line of fabric stretched across it, silvery blue, flecked with gold dust, stitched with the soft outline of a lute. No one ever cut it, no one dared. Instead, they encased the loom in glass. They called it the dreaming frame. Scene 93. The return of the lute. The bard's original lute had been lost to time, or so they thought. One spring after the river flooded and receded, something glinted among the stones. A small piece of dark walnut wood curved, smoothed by water. Then another, and another, bit by bit. The villagers collected the fragments and laid them on Brynner's weaving table. Helen traced their shapes. Ceylan measured them against her cloak. Together they rebuilt it. The strings were fashioned from thread spun during a lunar eclipse. When they played it for the first time, it didn't sing. It sighed, like wind slipping back into a home it thought it had lost. Scene 94. The Silver Trail. After the thread-keepers held their 100th gathering, a strange path appeared near the edge of the willow grove. Not dirt, not stone, but shimmer. A silver trail narrow and winding, leading to the water's edge, then vanishing. No one could trace its source. But it only appeared on Tuesdays, just before dusk. One child, barefoot and bold, followed it once. She returned, smiling but quiet, a single silver thread tied around her finger. When asked what she saw, she only said, "The quiet place." The next morning, she gave her favorite doll to the weaving hall, plur sewn into its dress. A note stitched with glowing thread, Pavo. The song lives here. Scene 95, The Listening. Stone, on the north end of Hollow Bridge. A stone once, thought plain, began to change. It darkened in color, warmed in touch even in winter. When someone sat beside it, back pressed against its surface, they heard nothing, but felt everything. A weight lifted, a memory soft, a name once feared became beloved. No one knew why, but they began calling it the Listening Stone. People started leaving little offerings near it, not gifts, but truths, a line from a dream, a song never sung, a fear let go. The stone never replied, but when the wind passed over it, it paused, as if bowing in return. Let me know your thoughts about this story in the comments down below. What do you think? Did you enjoy it? Do you want to hear more stories like this? Let me know down below. But while you do that, take a second to smash that like button, because this took me quite a while to write. Also, if you want to hear more of these stories, consider subscribing so you don't miss any future installments. Bye. And if you really want to support the channel, you can check out my page or join my membership program. Links are in the description for both those things. Until next time, thank you for watching and have a good one. Bye. A million thanks to my supporters for allowing me to spin these tailies until our hands are sore and our voices are hoarse, for making this final season possible, and for whispering these stories into being. And now we step through the door of the weaving hole and join the spinners of tailies. If you find yourself here at the end, please know there are more adventures to come. New stories are spun each week over at our website. And if you wish to support us, to help keep the lights on in the Weaver's Hall, become a supporter today. All information you need is available at our website. So gather round, dear friends, for we are almost done. This is scene 118, the tiniest thread. For many years after Relion stepped out of the bridge, the weavers worked. They wove for comfort, for solace, for remembrance. They wove the stories of the living and the dead. They wove of laughter and loss, of sunshine and rain. They wove of courage and kindness. Bewove of every shade of experience, good and bad, happy and sad, and wove them together so that none needed to face their darkness alone. One day, a girl named Nessa, barely taller than the loom, was sweeping under the looms when a broom hit something hard. Tucked beneath a floorboard in the farthest corner sat a small ball of silver thread. It pulsed gently with light not bright, but steady. Nessa picked it up, cradled it. She didn't take it to the elders. She didn't try to unwind it. She didn't ask any questions. She just... listened. And as she held it close, she heard not with her ears, but with the part of herself that still remembered lullabies in the womb. She heard the story of the bard, of the bridge, of the weavers, and wind, and silence, of loss turned into cloth, of dreams returned. She said nothing. She didn't need to. She wrapped the thread in cloth and carried it to her bed. That night she slept deeper than ever before. Eventually, weavers stopped beginning or ending their tapestries. They no longer worked on rectangles. They began weaving in circles, spirals and loops, each thread winding into the next. One tapestry, begun by Iluan's daughter, was passed from weaver to weaver for over 50 years. Each added one row, then passed it on. By the end, no one could say where it had started. It had no center, no edge. It was not displayed. It was folded and placed in a small satchel made from willow bark and laid at the base of the lullaby tree, the weavers called it, the song that sings itself. Scene 119, the final note in the river. On a moon-dim night, when even the stars seemed to rest their glow, the river gave its last note, a soft, low vibration that only those still enough could feel. It rippled outward, not just through water, but through time. The bridge stilled, the trees listened, and the village paused. No one moved for several breaths, and then, gently, the river flowed, as always. But something had changed. The song had landed, like a feather on open ponds. Scene 120, the Bridge of Dreams. It is said now that Hollow Bridge exists in more than one place. Some see it in dreams. Some see it reflected in puddles that ripple with familiar rhythm. Some see it in the eyes of a mother singing softly. In the turn of a weaver's hand. In the breath between words. When silence feels kind. One boy claimed to have crossed it in sleep and returned with a thread wrapped around his finger. One elder claimed she'd never left. Perhaps it's true. Bridge no longer waits for travelers. It lives in them. Sing 121, the lantern above the door, in the heart of the village. Above the door of the weaving hall hangs a lantern. It is never lit by hand, but some nights, usually when someone new arrives in town, the lantern glows with soft amber light. The kind of light that makes strangers feel like they're finally home. Inside the door, there is always warm bread and a place to sit and thread waiting to be held. The weavers say nothing. They simply nod and smile, because they know another story has begun, and it will be told in thread and hush and kindness. Scene 122, the last cloak. On a morning washed with gold, Salen old, now nearly part of the silence, herself scothered the village. She brought a single piece of cloth, soft grey, weightless. I've made the last cloak, she said. No one asked why. She placed it on a low stone near the edge of the bridge, not to be worn, not to be claimed. It was not meant to wrap the shoulders. It was meant to wrap the village. And when the wind stirred, the cloak didn't lift. It unfolded, slowly, gracefully, and became air, and shimmer, and memory. Scene 123. The end. That whisper. There is no plaque on Hollow Bridge, no statue of the bard, no carved stone to mark what was. Only thread, only hush, only you who now carry the song in the space between your breaths. You who know that lullabies are not sung only to babies but to all who seek peace. You who understand that endings are only quieter beginnings. And when the world feels too loud, too heavy, too fast, remember, there is still a bridge, still a song, still a silver thread that knows your name. Close your eyes now. You are part of the quiet. You are home. Final whisper good night. The bard's tune lives on, in every hush that heals, in every pause that loves, in the sacred silver quiet between your heartbeat and your dreams. Sleep now. The wind is watching, the bridge is listening, the lullaby never ends. The end is... Hello. Yes, this is the end. I know it's difficult to say goodbye, but as I always say, endings are just quieter beginnings. Besides, aren't you glad you had the chance to meet Ness, to walk beside the river on moonlit night, to listen to the songs of the weavers? We'll miss you terribly, but also not at all. For you will always be here within these walls, within these stories, within the whispers of the wind. Bend whenever you hear the first notes of the ballad on the breeze. You'll know the bridge is nearby, waiting for you to return. Thank you for traveling this road with us. May your path be ever peaceful. May your cup be ever full. May your hands be ever busy making music. And may your nights be filled with sweet dreams. Thank you.